Hello, my dears. How are you tonight? Thank you for coming. I do appreciate you being here. Uh, yeah, my name is Liliana Young. Let me tell you a little about myself, what I'm doing here. This is my launch event for my State House Seat 61 campaign. I've been a resident of Bloomington for about 10 years. I am originally from Texas, and coming from Texas, I know how bad things get when Republicans are left to run rampant, when nobody challenges them properly. And I see a lot of similarities to the Dallas area that I grew up in here in Bloomington. In a lot of ways, I feel like Bloomington is kind of a condensed Dallas. And it makes me feel like I've always been here in a lot of ways. And because of that, I want to do what I can to keep anything in this state from getting any worse. Over the last few years, I've been an active member of Bloomington's LGBTQ community. I have founded a non-registered organization called Sisterhood. It was a collection of trans women. We were involved in mutual aid, in political activism in the city and on the state level. It was also a social hub. And through that community, I made sure that trans women in Bloomington had access to medicine and food when they had prescription lapses or money was just too tight. I also helped push through the Safe Haven Resolution for Gender Affirming Care that was passed in Bloomington last year in June. If you're not familiar with that, effectively it means in the city of Bloomington, we will not actively comply with state law that outlaws gender affirming care for minors unless the state specifically steps in and orders the city to participate. It's kind of malicious compliance. We can't supersede the state law, of course, but it gives some delay, a little bit of protection to our local families here that they otherwise wouldn't have. It's also a promise from the city that they're committed to helping the trans community however possible. Sometimes it won't be as much as we would like. The city can't always successfully fight the state, but we do what we can. And even if it were only a symbol, symbols do still have power. Symbols are things people can round up. And I'm proud of that work that I did on that resolution. I'm also very proud to see that in the months and the year since that resolution was passed, it's been spreading throughout the state. A nearly identical safe haven resolution was recently passed in West Lafayette. There's a group working to pass one in Kokomo, in Muncie, and in Evansville. And I've been in contact with the members of those groups in those cities, and they all credit our work in Bloomington as their inspiration. I'm very proud of that. I also currently serve as a secretary of the Bloomington-Monroe County Human Rights Commission. And through my work on that commission, I have broadened my scope, not just focusing on the trans community, but helping all demographics in Bloomington and Monroe County, investigating cases of discrimination and inequitable treatment, doing whatever I can to negotiate settlements and policy changes wherever we can, as long as it falls in line with city ordinance. Also, being a commission, we have our foot in the door with the mayor's office, which means a direct line to influencing policy. And we haven't gotten anything finalized over this last year, but we have been working on additional resolutions. We've also been working on a municipal ID program, which will still probably be a while, but we've done a lot of research. We've had months of discussion on it. We are starting to bring the mayor in on discussing it. And I'm hoping that by early next year, we may finally have a municipal ID program off the ground. In summary, municipal IDs, if you're not familiar with those, it's a legal ID that's recognized by cities. They don't have any legal recognition beyond the city that issues them, but within the city, valid identification. Most cities that use municipal IDs use these other ways, including their immigrant communities. They also have been found to be a huge boon to trans communities. Municipal IDs usually have a little more lax requirements than state IDs. So it can be a little easier to have things like gender markers that you identify with, or sometimes municipal IDs don't even use those at all, which can also be great. The municipal IDs are also known to help homeless people and people with criminal backgrounds who may have difficulty getting ID documents. Our researchers found that they can help just about everyone. They can also, because they are bound to a city, they can also double as other things like bus passes, library cards. I believe it was Plymouth, Indiana, uses theirs also as a discount card with local businesses. What the final form of ours will look like, I can't say yet, but these are all the things that they can do, and it's a program I believe very strong. So that's a bit about me. Why I'm running. I feel like there's been a stagnation both in the country and in the state that has led to a status quo that just doesn't work for anybody. And I'm very tired of that. And as much as I blame Republicans for the damage they've done, I also blame Democrats for participating in that stagnation. And I don't hold any malice against the incumbent Bloomington, Matt Pierce, but he has been in his seat for 22 years. And after 22 years, I don't see things in the state improving. And I am reputed among those who know as being loud and stubborn and aggressive. And I think if I could accomplish, for example, half of what Zoe Zephyr has accomplished in Montana, then I think I would be doing a lot for this state, not only for trans issues, but for every demographic in this state that needs to be uplifted right now. It's almost all of them. So the topic specifically of this forum was state of trans rights in Indiana. I'll skip ahead a little and I'll summarize it. It isn't great, but it isn't all doom and gloom. And that's something that I do want to talk about. This is the obligatory potential trigger warning if you have any anxiety issues. I'm not going to shy away from talking about some difficult topics because you can't really honestly discuss these things if you don't. You need to step out at any point, or you don't want. And don't worry, unlike Pete Higgs, this is actually coffee. So is there anybody in the audience who identifies as trans? Hello, my dears, welcome. Those who didn't raise their hand, I assume you identify as cis. If you do, raise your hand for me, go for it. Great. If you don't mind, why don't you tell me, what does it mean to be trans? Yeah.
Well, I'm definitely not going to be the best answer, but that's the point.
Hey,
right?
give it your best shot.
I would say that being trans is primarily about, on some level, whether that be, sometimes especially like historically, like a cognitive cleanse that has its own issues, or, a variety of other levels, but on some level, just not feeling comfortable with either the sex or gender or kind of gender expectations that you were, quote unquote assigned with it for the ones that are.
Okay, I don't think that's a bad answer. Gentlemen on the, with classes here on the end, why don't you tell me, what do you think it means to be trans?
I mean, I think that's, yeah, I think it's, I agree with others, I think it's about, yeah, not being comfortable with in your own body to some degree, and, also pushing back against the binary that society has forced people to live in.
Yeah, okay. I think that that's also a pretty decent answer. So I would say, you get a lot of debate about what it even means to be trans, depending on what circles you're traveling in or talking to. Some people say it's purely medical, some people say it's purely social. In reality, it's a little of both. It's a lot. It's complicated, is the real answer. I'm sure you two understand that all too well. I grew up in the 90s, and it was an era where we knew that trans people existed, but you didn't talk about it really. You might occasionally see a joke about us in a movie, and that was about it. So I didn't really have access to language that I could grab onto and identify with, but I always knew that there was something out of place for some reason that I couldn't quite define. Unfortunately, it took me until I was about 31 before the switch flipped in my head, and I finally understood what my lifelong depression had been rooted in. But sometimes it's about having a mismatch with your sex attributes. Sometimes it's about roles that would generally be expected of you just not fitting who you are. And no matter what combination of social or medical it might be for any given individual, it's always a pain in the ass. This is where I will say to those of you who identify as cis, please take the terminology biological male or biological female and remove it from your vocabulary entirely. They're just not accurate in any real context, and they're not even medically recognized terms. I've spoken with biologists, and they don't. It's like when a dog does a little head tilt. That's the reaction I get when I've actually spoken with researchers and doctors about that term. So, cultural, what are we dealing with culturally? Well, harassment is pretty damn rampant these days. And I would say over the last year, it's been worse than it was in the decade prior. Not hard to imagine why. Our state and federal government elected officials are spewing anti-trans rhetoric constantly. And while they may not have to date set up the camps to bring our people to, a constant ramping up of rhetoric still contributes to very real harm. It creates a culture where it is perfectly okay to shun and harass and even attack people and get away with it. Just because they're the outgroup that you designated. And it's really unfortunate that we have to have this, not just from our president and our vice president, our federal Congress. But as I said, our state officials are just as bad about this. The things that I have heard come out of Mike Braun and Micah Beckwith and Todd Rakita's mouths have made me really question my commitment to living in this state. And that's just regarding trans issues, let alone how they approach everything else. Unfortunately, even blue cities like Bloomington aren't entirely safe. My closest trans sister in this city came just seconds away from being attacked in a women's locker room by a man who chased her in there because he was worried about a man being in the women's locker room. I don't think he quite grasped the irony of the situation. And to my sister's credit, she's quite good with words and was able to diffuse the situation. But the fact that that happened and that he got as close to her physically as he did and was as irate as he was, means he was really only seconds away from escalating. And I don't mind sharing that that event has stuck with me, and that's been a year since that happened. That event scared the hell out of me. This is my home, Bloomington. And in Bloomington, Indiana, we like to pat ourselves on the back about how progressive we are, about how safe it is for our queer communities here. And if that can happen here, how bad can it be in other places where they don't care as much, if even at all, about being welcoming and progressive? It really sucks. More than words can really say. And that's all just culture. We're not even getting into policy yet. And I'd like to take a moment to invite the cis members of the audience to just think about that for a moment. For things about yourself that you don't have control over, you may never actually be safe, even in this theoretically safest city in the state. You might question going outside, even just to get the mail again. Sometimes I have. I will stop here and ask if any of my trans audience members have anything on that line that they would like to share. You don't have to, but if you would like to, feel free.
I guess there is, well, I've never been particularly threatened, luckily, I definitely get very close, and I can't tell how to it's because they perceive me as cis guys. Sometimes I can get perceived as cis guy, so long as I open my mouth. But, or if it's because they kind of get the feel of it, if you understand. And I have that work. I go by a masculine name. I have it where had people stop me, they're like, what is that short for? And you can tell why it is. And I had to, I don't want to say I name myself since I don't hate my group. But I have had to out my birthday not possibly informed or related. It's not exactly fun.
No, don't think it is either. It kind of sucks too, especially for somebody like me. I've spent so many years sculpting all of this and I look great. But then I open my mouth and I'm pretty clocky. I don't really care that much about the sound of my voice. It is what it is, and I've come to enjoy it. But it goes into what you just said. I do get looks when I open my mouth. It confuses people, which then can lead to a lot of things. I work at a local restaurant in my day job, and I cannot count the number of times I've had people genuinely refuse to just not be assholes. The moment that they decide they've clocked me as trans, they just have to start saying something. I have a former coworker here who can attest to that. But that's just small examples from just a couple of people in this room. I assure those of you who haven't experienced this, it's worse. And it's far more rampant than you may understand just from a couple of anecdotes. So let's talk a little about the criminal justice side of trans rights, because that's a fun topic. The trans community does not have a good history with cops. That's a very mild way of phrasing it. We have long since dealt with a problem where the moment we hand over an ID that does not have a photo that matches what we look like or a name that we use, cops have commonly not understood how to react to this. Now, in some places, in some cities, it's gotten a little better. Some precincts around the country and even in Indiana have gotten a little more progressive. I've spoken with the Monroe County Sheriff himself. I have spoken with officers from Bloomington Police, and they're working on it. They've implemented programs trying to educate their cops how to be a little more knowledgeable and a little more sensitive. But that isn't everywhere. And it's not even everywhere in Indiana. And that's still a real problem. Because when a cop doesn't know how to react to you, they default to reacting badly. It's just a matter of how they're trained and the culture that cops are indoctrinated to serve in. And that has led to a lot of problems in trans history. It's not an exaggeration to say that even just these situations of a mismatch between a person and their ID has led to violent unfoldings. It may not be the most common thing, but it has happened. And it's still a problem that we have to worry about. There's also the problem of what happens if you're arrested. Because that's where things get even worse. Trans women are 10 times statistically more likely to be assaulted than any other inmate, by both other inmates and by warden staff. That's a lovely little statistic. And sometimes that simply is a result of her not having an ID that says female. So legally, you're still classified as male. So legally, they put you in the male side of detention. Sometimes it's just a matter of state law or local policy that, well, doesn't matter if we think we've clocked you as trans, we're going to assume you belong in a certain area of the jail, and that's where we're gonna put you. Doesn't really matter how you live or what you had done or surgery or hormones or anything. Sucks to suck, I guess. Seems to be the attitude. I am pleased that at least here locally, it's not that bad. I have spoken with our Monroe County Sheriff. And my God, I can't believe I've forgotten his name. But he actually did bring a presentation to us at the Bloomington Monroe County Human Rights Commission. Talked about policies that he'd been working on to overhaul human rights conditions and treatment from the Monroe County Sheriff. And I've been investigating that a little further with my fellow commissioners. And from what we've gathered and from his side of things, things are better than they may have otherwise been. And as far as how trans people, men, women, non-binary, are housed in the Monroe County jail, they're not put in any specific sexed area. They're put in their own isolated cells, which I'm not necessarily fond of. Isolation does not do humans good, but the rationale of that was that he understands the statistics when I spoke with him about it. And his decision was, at least with the current jail that they have, to simply opt for an isolated housing because he thought that was the best approach until theoretically this new larger jail may eventually get built. I suppose time will tell on that one. I'm not really sure whether or not I'm a fan of the new bigger jail or not. What do y'all think trans people are most often arrested for? Since we're on the topic. My friend?
Oh, I'd say probably for the most part, like, and if we're talking about like felonies, probably just BS felonies.
Exactly. How about you two?
Again. Misstatement space, then they think not supposed to.
Or not being let off with warnings when otherwise system would. Being pulled over for speeding and not escalating for something.
You don't want to get caught driving while trans, let me tell you. Anybody from the second tier? No thoughts? Perfectly fine. By my research, trans people are overwhelmingly arrested for drug use, for sex work, and for homelessness. All of which are almost always issues of poverty, not actually egregious law-breaking situations. People are very, very rarely harmed in those. Talk about the medical side of trans rights. Because I love that one. I'm sure all of you do too. So, does anybody want to volunteer what you think the effects of what we would call natural puberty can be on a trans person? feel free to raise your hand if you want to have any. Go right ahead.
Actually, would you mind letting people answer first? If that might-
Not at all. Anybody like to offer? Yeah, go ahead.
There's an expression on TV shows, body horror. And that pretty much sums it.
I think that that is a wonderful answer. Would you like to add your thoughts?
I suppose the best way to put it is. I don't, just to put it bluntly, I wanted to die. I would fall asleep crying and begging to anything out there that I wouldn't wake up. Because of the way everyone started to treat me once I started going to treatment. I suddenly went from being allowed to express myself however I wanted to now I had to be put in a box. No one would let me out of that box. Anytime I tried to get out of that box, I would be thrown right back in. And no one seemed to understand why it was so bad. I didn't understand why it was so bad. When I finally started getting the language, and I was thrown directly back in the box.
Thank you, brother. I recognize that that's hard to talk about. But that's a pretty common sentiment among our community. The wishing you won't wake up the next day. What we call natural puberty for trans people is nearly always extremely traumatic. And in many ways, it's a trauma you don't really ever recover from. You can incorporate that trauma into your life and you can understand how to navigate the lingering feelings in your day-to-day life. But once you've been through it, it will always stay with you. Really, no matter what you do. And I've spent years in therapy. I'm still not entirely over it. And that's part of, well, not part of, that's the reason why I find it so disheartening that gender affirming care for minors is now illegal in the state of Indiana. I firmly believe it's a utterly heartless decision. It's not rooted in science. It's not rooted in morality. It's not rooted in anything positive. It's rooted in fear, and it's rooted in control. It's a message to families of anybody that there's really only one way to live. But in particular, it's a message to families of trans kids that those in power don't think it's okay to be any different and to go against the grain in any capacity. But I cannot tell you how many times I have talked to younger trans people who come from families that support them and help them find whatever that care might be. Sometimes it's just social stuff. Sometimes it's medical stuff. But whichever it is, those kids always end up flourishing within just a few months. And it's one of the best things you ever see. And I genuinely don't understand how any elected official of whatever position can look at that, those kids and those families and think that that's something to be afraid of. My daughter is not trans, but anything that I can ever do that puts a smile on her face is always worth it to me. So I could only assume that for a family of trans kids, doing that act of accepting them, helping them, doesn't just put one smile on their face, it puts 1,000 smiles on their face, day after day. And I think that that is exactly what this state should be focused on, not forcing kids into little boxes that they can't climb out of. It's also official state policy that trans people in state prisons are not given access to ongoing hormone treatments. And since people are rarely in prison for short periods, that means effectively, if you are trans and if you're put in a state prison in Indiana, you're also forcefully transitioned. And rewinding a little to the part from earlier where I talked about how it's a little bit social and a little bit medical, touching on the medical side of things, I will summarize by saying, in a very real way, a trans person's brain generally doesn't work right until you give them the hormone that their body's trying to act as though is the dominant hormone, but isn't. It's a clumsy way of describing it, but I hope you understand what I mean when I say that. So in the case of a trans woman, like myself, simply being on estrogen for a couple of months in the very beginning of my transition, it was like an internal switch in my head flipped. And I actually started processing things internally in a way that made sense and felt right. This was 6 months.
Recording
before
stopped.
Any physical changes were visible. So it really doesn't take long if you're forcefully detransitioned to start feeling the negative effects of that. And going back to what was said a moment ago, it can definitely put you in a position of hoping you don't wake up the next day. And adding that on top of being in prison to begin with, I would consider that to just be torture, personally. Does anybody think that adult transition or childhood transition takes more time or resources? Raise your hand if you'd like to add your thoughts on that.
Between the two,
Mhm.
adult transition.
Absolutely. I've spoken with conservative people who have this idea that childhood transition is all about money, giving it to big pharma, blah, blah. We've all heard that before, I'm sure. What they often don't seem to grasp is when you force a trans person to go through that puberty that they don't want to go through. And once those effects have been set for years, undoing that through an adult transition is far more time consuming, far harder, far more costly. The more that we are allowed to transition younger, the easier it makes things, the cheaper it typically is. Spend far fewer dollars and far fewer resources on childhood transition because you're not reversing things that have already happened. You're just setting up a different puberty. And I think that that also constitutes a type of torture. And I don't think that we should ever be okay with forcing any person into a position where it takes years and years of their life and thousands and thousands of dollars that they probably don't have to try to undo things, developments on their body that they may not have had to deal with if we allowed them to just take a pill when they were younger. There's also a nice overlap between trans people and our disabled community. Over my time in Bloomington, I've come to know about 70 trans people and dozens of them are medically classified as disabled. There's varying degrees of disability, of course, it's not all the same, but being disabled puts you in a disadvantage in many different ways. It puts a lot of limits on how you can live your life. It puts limits on how you can work, if you can even work at all. And that only becomes even more of a problem with changes to Medicaid that recently happened both in the state and by federal policy, where now you have to work so many hours just to qualify for Medicaid. Used to be Medicaid was for disabled people who can't work. Now, if you are classified as disabled and you genuinely can't do certain jobs, you might get kicked off of Medicaid, which for a lot of us is the only access to health insurance that we have. And theoretically, I could qualify for a corporate health care plan at my job. The problem is corporate health insurance is extremely damn expensive. At my company, having corporate health insurance eats up about a third of my paycheck every week. I have previously had a plan that couldn't sustain it. Ultimately, I had to put myself in a situation of losing work hours and qualifying for Medicaid, because it's the only way that I can maintain health insurance and not lose more money than I'm earning. And there are thousands of trans who rely on Medicaid. There's thousands of trans Hoosiers who are probably going to lose that over the next year or two because of these changes that have been. So what do you think happens when somebody like us loses access to medication that we otherwise can't afford that helps us sustain the state of being that we actually want to live in? If you'd like to add your thoughts to that, go ahead. Go ahead.
I mean, there's the obvious suicide rates going up. And there's also the fact that, as you mentioned specifically sex work. Historically, trans people, especially trans women, have had to resort to sex work. Sometimes they're okay with it, having fun, but many people have had
to avoid any form of aftercare.
Exactly. And, you know, I don't shame sex workers. Some of them, as you said, enjoy it. But most of them that I have ever known and spoken with have not really been there because they wanted to be. And I have found that it seems to be doubly so for trans people, in particular trans women. So let's talk a little about the legal side of trans rights in Indiana. And by the way, what time is it? Thank you. What's that? Thank you. So, can a trans person amend their birth certificate in the state of Indiana? As of right now, that is kind of.
I just dealt with that today. Called the local health department, put me to the state health department, put me to the attorney general's office, put me to the paralegal. Still waiting on them to even figure out what's going on. I put this in February. I had my order in February.
Now, this process has changed since I had all of my identification documents changed. But my wife is currently dealing with this. And we're not entirely sure what's going to be the outcome. My understanding is that you can change the name on your birth certificate, but you can't change the gender marker on your birth certificate. That's because our illustrious Attorney General has declared that it is fraud to change the gender marker on a birth certificate. I say that birth certificates are not anywhere near as used as they used to be as ID documents. And at this point, in a lot of ways, it's more about allowing a person to tell their own story of their life. Not to say that there aren't legal applications for a birth certificate, because there still are, but simply allowing a person to tell their own story. If anybody at any point, regardless of their internal identity, decides they want to change something on their birth certificate, I think that they should be allowed to do so and change that part of their life story because it's their life. But there is also the legal application of birth certificates. And unfortunately, because there are so many situations where you need one form of identification from column A and one form of identification from column B, and probably one from column C, depending on what exactly you're trying to get done at any given point. There are still plenty of times where you need a birth certificate. And when you can't get your birth certificate amended to match the name and hopefully gender on your social security card or your state ID or any other identification document, it causes problems. And the problem basically becomes that you have different databases and different forms of ID that identify you in different ways. And no one agency, no department, no level of government communicating with each other can actually figure out who you're supposed to be. And you end up in a limbo where nothing is getting done. I'm sure you're having a lot of fun with that. I know we are.
I can't even get a driver's license. They require the birth certificate.
Can we still amend driver's licenses theoretically? That's also a kinda. As of today, if you have the proper documentation, assuming that the state has actually allowed you to amend it, you can technically get your driver's license changed. If you want to change your name and or gender markers, but that may not last much longer. Just about, I think, 2 or 3 months ago, the BMV was holding an open forum, gathering public feedback on a proposed policy change, meant to fall in line with Governor Braun's executive order that states you can't be trained in Indiana. The policy change in the BMV would be simply, we no longer change information on state IDs, especially gender markers. The process that goes through is meant to go through department heads of the BMV. It's meant to go through the Attorney General, and it's meant to go through the governor before final decisions are made. I want to ask, what do any of you think our state attorney general or our governor might have to say about any of that? Well, they've already said that we're frauds. They've already said that they don't really think we belong in their state. They've already said that they just plain don't like people like us. So you'll have to forgive me for being a little pessimistic, but I haven't been holding my breath that the powers that be won't formally change this process at the BMV. The schedule outlined that it should be done by October. So my guess is within another week or two, we will probably know for certain. And I'm guessing that it's gonna be a no. This leads back to previous things I've talked about, mismatches between a person, how they look, the names they use, and what their ID says. And this doesn't even just become a problem when you're dealing with police officers. There are countless day-to-day happenings where a person presents their ID for something and is regarded in a certain way by what's on that ID. Going to a bank, getting carded for smokes or beer, or any other several dozen potential happenings. And because of the culture we live in, we're very gendered. It's just the way that our culture has evolved. We don't really think about it. And we see an ID that has an M or an F, and we just go, okay. A lot of people don't even think about it. I had been on HRT for almost a year when I got my court orders done years ago to change all of my ID documents. The day before I had my court order, I went to the bank, presented my ID to look at something on my account, was regarded as sir, even though I was looking pretty similar to this. And just a month later, after getting my ID amended, go to the bank, present my ID, and looking identical was regarded as ma'am. This is just a result of the autopilot that everybody lives on and people don't really think about. And on the surface, you might think, well, that doesn't sound like that big of a deal. Being called sir or ma'am a few times a day can't be that bad. When it's over and over and over again, surrounded by people who either deliberately or not deliberately just aren't thinking about it, who refer to you in a way that you don't personally respond to, identify with. It becomes a death by a thousand cuts kind of a situation. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you accidentally misgender a trans person and they get upset about it immediately, it's not because they're just hypersensitive to it. It's because, and I guarantee you, you are the 100th person that day who's done that. And they're just really tired. And I don't necessarily enjoy crashing out myself. I try to keep my cool. But when I'm at work, we're busy. And I've had 30 people in a row who want to call me sir for whatever reason that is in their head. By the time I get to that 30th person, starting to get a little irritated. And I get a little snappy. Sorry, hopefully my server will make up for it. When trans women play sports in Indiana? No. Technically, they can play with the men's leagues, but you know what I mean when I ask that question. That's the other big legal element of being trans in Indiana. Over the last, I think, year and a half, Representative Davis in the state legislature has made it her mission to repeatedly file incrementally worse versions of the same bill that have made it increasingly harder and harder until now we can't have them at all for trans women to be involved in women's sports on any level. Whether she's 5 years old or 30, whether she's in high school or college or preschool. You can't play sports if you're trans in Indiana. And I myself was never the most athletic kid growing up. But I was friends with a lot of kids who were in sports clubs, who were in their junior high or high school or college sports teams. And one of the biggest things that school sports does for kids is it gives them something to belong to. It gives them an extra layer of community. It gives them things to aspire to, things to work towards. And when you tell an entire demographic of people that you can't have that now because we just don't like how you were born, you're stripping an entire demographic of people from access to community, to things to aspire to. I don't think that that falls in line with what we like to regard as Hoosier values or Hoosier hospitality. I don't think that aligns with human decency. You know, there's a lot of fear. Some people just don't really know better and they assume, well, I feel like it makes sense that if you were born male, you go through male puberty, then you're just going to be naturally better at physical stuff than normal women, right? Doesn't really seem to be the case. I've spent the last couple of years looking into research on this. I personally have not yet found a study that agrees with that perspective. everything I have ever read has found that within roughly 1 to 2 years of being on hormone replacement therapy, trans women lose the theoretical advantages of testosterone. What a lot of people don't really seem to understand is that our bodies are canvases. Whether you're born male or female, whatever your chromosomes might be, that doesn't really matter. Your body is designed to develop and respond in accordance to the primary hormone that is in your bloodstream, like a canvas and paint. You can paint something on a canvas and then you can remove that paint and you can apply a new coat of paint to make an entirely different painting. That's how the human body works. It didn't always have curves and breasts. But now, I'm sure you all saw. This is just from hormones. No surgery, nothing. And I will also say that even though I try and spend as much time as I can at the gym, I'm still not as strong as I used to be prior to my transition. Used to be I could actually lift about twice as much without even trying. All the weightlifting in the world that I engage in now has really just kind of put me not even half that. It's where I used to be. I just don't think people seem to understand that. And I know that that's anecdotal. I'm just talking about myself, but there is data, there is research, not a lot, admittedly. Unfortunately, trans people are still woefully understudied. But, as I said, after almost 3 years of researching this myself, I haven't found anything that agrees with the position, the conservative position. And I love science. I love science even when it presents something that's uncomfortable. I'd happily be the first one to tell this entire room if I found actual research that said trans women do have huge advantages in sports. I wouldn't like saying it, but if it were true, I'd tell you. Is it legal to deny trans people housing or work in the state just for being trans? Yes, it is actually. There are no state level protections in Indiana that include gender identity or gender expression. So even if you may live in a city that has an ordinance that does include those things, you can still be denied or evicted theoretically on the basis of just being trans, or denied a job or fired theoretically for just being trans. Now, it can be hard to make that happen sometimes. If you are a business owner who has a trans employee and you just don't like them, you don't want them around, it might be a little difficult to figure out how to get rid of them, but theoretically, you can do it. And the state itself is not going to have your back. Have many of my trans friends experienced anything like this? No?
Luckily, not. I'm personally not at my workplace, so because I'm afraid of something like that.
I do have a close friend in the city who was denied housing for a time for being trans. Made it very difficult for her to move when the lease in her old house was up. That was not a great period of time for her. And while so far bathrooms and locker rooms have not been designated illegal for us, unfortunately, I see the same bill being filed every single year in our state legislature, trying to make it illegal for trans people to be in the supposedly wrong bathroom. I don't really personally care that much for the idea of gendered bathrooms anyway. I personally just like the idea of single stall bathrooms everywhere. I don't really want to deal with other people. But as long as we have that kind of a bathroom design, it is a little weird to have somebody who looks like me in a bathroom with somebody who looks like you. In fact, when I'm at work, I can't count the number of times that when it's my turn to clean the men's room, men who will come in will pause, look at me cleaning, and wonder where they are. I've been asked 5 times in the same 10-minute span, am I in the right bathroom? Yes, my dude, come on and do your thing. Now, we've kind of gone over a lot of bleak sounding things. The air in the room, at least to me, feels a little unhappy, a little oppressive. Let's lighten that up a little bit. As I said at the start of this, it is not all doom and gloom. Even though on a state level and federal level, the status of trans rights in Indiana is not good, there are people who are working to make it better. And they're working all over the state. And there are some things that are already in place. I mentioned earlier at the start of this, something about municipal IDs. And as of right now, there are municipal ID programs in multiple cities in Indiana. I believe it was Goshen, Plymouth, South Bend, and Elkhart all have municipal ID programs. And the same group that oversees those cities' IDs has handed over their framework to Fort Wayne. And as I said, I, in my capacity as a city commissioner, have been working on the same thing in Bloomington. The great thing about municipal IDs is that even though their legal reach is limited, they do allow typically lower requirements and make it a little easier for people to have an ID with a name and often a gender that they actually identify with, or no gender at all. And for some of us, that seems to be preferable. Welcome. Hi. Look. There's also many cities and counties in Indiana that do list gender identity and or gender expression in their non-discrimination ordinance. Depending on the city, sometimes it's only extends to immediate city employment, sometimes it's a little broader, no discrimination of, businesses or public accommodations. Here in Bloomington, we do have gender identity in the city's anti-discrimination ordinance. And it extends to public accommodations, housing, employment, and services, public businesses. And in Bloomington, throughout the commission that I'm a part of, we do enforce this ordinance as much as we possibly can. And I have spoken with people in other cities who have told me the same, that they also have city commissions that do what they can to enforce those ordinances to the fullest extent. I also mentioned earlier that safe haven resolutions are spreading throughout the state. And to go over that just a little bit more, the thing with resolutions is resolutions don't typically have a lot of teeth. It's a statement, it's a direction for a governing body to move in. It can't conflict with law, it can't override law. But statements of intent can still have a lot of value. And a formal resolution can still be a city's way of publicly declaring, this is the direction we will move in regarding XYZ policies. And in the case of these safe haven resolutions, most of them so far have applied to how cities approach gender affirming care for minors and families that want to actually help their kids. And the great thing about having these resolutions is we are now at a place where several cities in Indiana, even if they have not all adopted these resolutions, there are ground level organizations that reject the no gender affirming care for minors law. And there are multiple cities that have either already agreed to reject that law as much as they can, or are considering how to reject that law. This means that for trans youth, even when things seem miserable, even if it feels like the state wants to do everything to press its boot down on you, there's a lot of people here who want to have your back. And they're trying really hard to have your back as much as they can. And now some of these local initiatives may not seem like they add up to a whole lot, but I think that giving any minority group room to breathe on any issue that they're contending with is always infinitely better than nothing at all. And even if we ended up in a point where I had my state ID stripped away from me and forcibly changed, I could still potentially have municipal ID, city ID from Bloomington that says I belong in Bloomington, that says I'm a part of Bloomington's community. Could theoretically be more in line with how I actually live my life. And even if that were the only thing that I had as far as an ID document goes, I think I'd actually rather have something from a city, from a community that cared enough to work with me and other people and make a program like that happen than I would from a state that is belligerent and hostile and works at every opportunity to put up another barrier in front of. what solutions do you all think we could pursue to make some of these things better?
the same kind of thinking, you know, there are, you're finding people that may not, you know, look like you or, feel the same way that you do, but there's strength in finding those folks. We have a new chapter in my part of Indiana, he's black, and I think that it does people, you know, I have met the biggest trans person that maybe you are. They're 7 years old, you know, and her family is dealing with school issues and didn't have troubles before, but things are different in public schools now, and but finding those people, they are out there. Old, white, cisgender, they don't like me, they're out there, and they really do want to help.
Maybe combating a lot of the misinformation, right? Like you said.
Reading the No Kings protest on, I think it's the 18th, probably a good thing to do.
Absolutely. Yes. Making sure whatever exists laws do exist actually that are protected actually being enforced. Just one example, the job that I used to work at, probably sued for a hostile work environment. Problem is it's the federal government and I don't think it's going to put themselves on the firing line for that. You know, municipality might be able to do something. Actually, they actually like go after violations of laws that they haven't taken off the books yet. Are you trying to tell me that our current federal government won't stand up for trans people? No. Less won't stand up for more will press down on very, very hard.
Their boots aren't even stylish.
Oh, honey, I missed an opportunity to wear my best. They decided on the flats.
Oh.
Opportunity missed.
Another solution is we could elect
Thank you for shilling for me.
It's literally my.
No, all of those solutions that were just offered up are great. Being involved in your community as much as you can helps. Probably more in your day-to-day life than anything coming from state laws. Protests actually are a great way to keep the public eye on things, any kind of a protest. Protests put things into public eye, it forces people to look at an issue that they may have otherwise been ignoring because, well, it's right there in the town square. And you have to drive by it on your way to work, and then you have to wonder, what is everybody protesting? Oh, really? Well, that's interesting. Let me learn a little more about that. Keeping up with electoral politics is one of the best ways to make things better. It's also one of the most tiring. Because when you talk about electoral politics, you're talking about county level, city level, state level, you're talking about keeping up with potentially dozens of candidates, all in your voting district. It becomes a lot of names, it becomes a lot of policy platforms to follow. And I will tell you, as somebody who, from the moment I wake up until the moment I go to bed, about 18 hours a day, I'm up to my neck in political videos and news. I understand it's hard to keep up with all of it. That said, I urge everybody to try to keep up with these things as much as you can. One great thing about the current state of things, well, great is theoretical, but the silver lining to what we're living in right now is we actually do have a lot of people running in Indiana on Democrat tickets, state level and federal level positions. In fact, it was my last counting, I think I counted 10 current state representative candidates, all running for Democrat tickets in Indiana. There's probably even more, because there's 100 state representative districts. We only need to flip, I think it was 4 seats to pull supermajority away from the Republicans. If we can get even more than that, that actually puts the Democrats in the state house in a position of having real, actual bargaining power, where they can actually, if they wanted to, do something. But not even just state representatives. Keeping up with your county and your city elections also matters, probably more than you might think. In fact, I would argue probably 50% of the policies and budgets and ordinances that govern your day-to-day life come from your city and your county first. Then everything from the state and then federal government will follow after that. You can also try and spend time lobbying your elected representatives. That could be hit or miss. This is, after all, Indiana, and I've dealt with some of our Republican representatives. A lot of them are not very interested in having meaningful conversations. Some of them, a few of them, might be. If you catch them on the right day, they're feeling good after eating a nice lunch. But the thing about lobbying is much like keeping up with the electoral politics, that also has to be a fairly sustained effort. You can't just go and meet with a representative once, talk to them about something, and hope that it's done and settled. You have to keep that pressure on them. Also understand that that's tiring and time consuming, but the more that you keep up with your elected representatives, whether it's face-to-face or phone calls and faxes and emails, what have you, the more you slowly chip away at the walls that they put up on something. And even the most diehard, fully indoctrinated MAGA representatives can change their mind because they're human. That's a fundamental quality of being human. We can all change our minds at some point or another. You just have to give people a reason to change their mind. You can also as you said, I'm sorry, you, as you said,
AJ,
sorry,
AJ,
work on combating misinformation.
wait.
And I would say that that's one of the bigger things that I would call on any cis members of our community to do. Do what you can to combat misinformation, and not politely either. Unfortunately, sometimes it's gonna be required from some of y'all to step in for us and shut something down hard and shut it down quickly. It may not be comfortable for you. You know, most people that I know anymore have some form of social anxiety. I know that my stomach is currently wound up into a knot. But shutting down forms of general day-to-day bigotry, misinformation, contributes to forging a better culture. Even when it's not polite or not comfortable. Anybody else have any other thoughts on what might contribute to making things better? Yes,
One thing, this is something that probably will not have highlighted, but leaning more towards gender for everything, rather than trying to put anyone in any box. Don't label things girl boys or boys toys. Take the amended label bathrooms are having. Instead of having gender neutral bathrooms, keep single stall thing, we back the Walmart, switch them up, have the gender neutral stall at the front, and put the single gender stall at the back for those who are. I've seen some places well instead, but what is available in the bathroom as a label for the bathroom. Because a lot of bathrooms don't have any stations, which is kind of a problem for a parent that wants debating on the floor. It's just leaning more towards not forcing dogs and disrespecting them people tell you they are. Giving basic decency, whether you like the person or not.
I completely agree with that. And I have always been the first one to tell other trans people, no, it's not okay to misgender the bad trans, because they're still trans, even if they did a dumb thing. And speaking as somebody who has changed my infant daughter on the floor, it's not. So, what is the state of trans rights in Indiana? And why a trans rights forum as my first official campaign event anyway? Am I a one-trick pony who only cares about my immediate community? No, not at all. I care about a lot of things. I care about kids being educated no matter what their family is like. I care about people having a roof over their head, even if they're completely broke. I care about people not having anxiety attacks because they don't know if they can eat for the next week or two. I care about having elected officials who work to solve problems instead of blaming the smallest and the weakest groups for their failures. And I care about people, all people, being able to pursue their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in all of its legal, economic, medical, and environmental forms. Trans rights issues intersect with all of these, and in many ways, Trans people are the modern canary in the coal mine. The erosion of our rights and liberties make it that much easier for anyone else's to be rolled back in turn. When trans people are legally forbidden from using restrooms and locker rooms, we see cisgender women suffer in kind. If your hair is too short, if you're too tall, too muscular, if you're not painted up in makeup like a toy doll, we've seen video after video and read article after article of the harassment and even assault that cisgender women can and have been subjected to. Doubly so if she's Black or Latina. As if public restrooms weren't already uncomfortable with the lines and the crying babies and the trash on the floors. Do we really want to add being hunted down and dragged out by cops to all of that? When trans women are prohibited from participating in sports, we see how being trans is wielded as a weapon, a cudgel, to beat cis women and girls into submission. Grown adults go to Little League games and scream at 9-year-olds for being too boyish. And petty college girls with chips on their shoulder accuse their opposing teams of secretly harboring trans women as a way of forcing disqualifications for easy wins. It's become so easy to use women's sports as a way to browbeat and shame women for simply being women that I fail to see any actual protections being extended to anyone. When states decree that someone diagnosed with autism isn't able to comprehend the possible consequences of transition medication, it's only a short step from decreeing that autistic people, regardless of their social functionality, can't comprehend anything and must therefore be locked away for their own good. Or maybe that's the point of it. When the families of trans kids aren't allowed to decide for themselves whether or not to allow their kids to be openly trans and to transition in any way, one way or another, we've set the stage for families everywhere to only treat and raise their children in accordance to the whims of the state. I have a feeling that a lot of conservative parents wouldn't like it if we had a law that said you can't indoctrinate your kid to Christian ideology. In the modern political landscape, trans people are the floodgate holding back a tide of anti-gay, anti-woman, anti-poor, anti-disabled, and anti-autistic policies and attitudes policing us. Our lives, our decisions, and our presentations is meant as a broader message to all: live how we tell you to live, or else. Is this the state of trans rights in Indiana? Is this the beginning of what's to become the state's culture and formal policy for how all Hoosiers have to live? I say enough is enough. From Texas to Indiana, from childhood to adolescence to adulthood, I have spent my 40 years of life watching and being on the receiving end of Republican cruelty. For 40 years, I've seen up close how Republicans scapegoat the weakest and least of us as the source of everyone's problems. For 40 years, I've watched good, honest, hardworking people live in the worst of conditions under the malicious, apathetic leadership of conservative policy. And I say, enough is enough. This is why I'm running for state representative. This is why I am intent on replacing our district's multi-decade incumbent. The long stagnating status quo that has led to Indiana being one of the most severely decayed states in the union has to change. It begins by replacing Democrats who won't use the stability of their safe districts to fight tooth and nail. It continues by using every tool at my disposal, every legislative mechanism, every avenue outside the legislative floor to push back on the Republican supermajority responsible for this misery. I'm running for seat 61 because I'm tired of watching people suffer. I'm running because I'm tired of the Democrats' excuses that have never held back Republicans.
Yeah.
I'm running because I too am angry as hell. And I'm running because there's somewhere between 75,000 and 150,000 trans, non-binary, and intersex people in Indiana who aren't being heard and need to be protected. But that's not all there is to the state of trans rights in Indiana. You see, no matter how dire things may be, no matter how close they press their knife to our throat, no matter how hard they try to make us hate ourselves, there is a simple truth we cannot forget. We have power over them. It's in the way they're compelled to write bill after bill to target us. It's in the way they never miss an opportunity to mug for the camera and turn any situation into something trans people are somehow responsible for. It's in the way they mock and belittle us through every available avenue. And as uncomfortable as it is to say, it's in the way internet traffic data shows us what the most conservative regions of America look up online that features trans people. The conservatives who pour so much time and energy into policing us, legislating against us, and trying to write us out of public existence are obsessed with us. From the moment they wake until the moment they fall asleep, they cannot stop themselves from thinking about us. We live rent-free in their head.
Only free rent in this country.
And though they may have the power to erode our freedom, they do so filled with guilt and shame that they can't think about anything else but us. So to my brothers and my sisters and my cousins, never forget this power you have. Never forget that we have allies who are in the trenches with us, working to change hearts and minds and push for ground level policy that gives us a chance to breathe. Never forget that times like what we are living through now are never inevitable and can be changed for the better. And never forget that no matter how much you feel that nobody is listening, I am right here fighting for you, speaking for you, breathing for you when I must. For all of Indiana's trans, non-binary, and intersex residents, for all of Indiana's poor and disabled and women and immigrants, for all Hoosiers, for whom this state has failed, I am fighting and will keep fighting for you and for the soul of Indiana. I'm gonna need a cookie after all of this.
Yes.
So that, I believe, is a state of trans rights in Indiana. And this is only the beginning of what I intend to do. My goal, my every desire is to be as involved with the city, with this community as I possibly can be. I have multiple other things in halfway through being planned. I hope to see all of you again soon. And then again and again and again. If you think that you believe in me and what I have presented so far, I would love to have you as a part of my political base. I have cards over here with a code to my campaign website. I invite you, take one or two or 5.
Hand it out for us. We got so many.
You can bookmark my campaign site. I have a designated news and update section where you can follow along. You can also find me on Blue Sky and YouTube, Liliana Young. I like to use the same name everywhere because I don't like being complicated. You can also find me sometimes on Reddit. You may have seen a poster or 2 of mine. Apparently, I had one that blew the absolute hell up a couple days ago. Did not expect that. And there's the part that I am the least comfortable in talking about. That is campaign donations. It's the part that I hate, I promise you. But campaigning against an incumbent, we campaign full time, does require me to have money. And I understand that for everybody, money is very tight these days. If you feel like you've got 5 or 10 spare dollars, you'll find the donation form through my website. If you think you know anybody else who has $5 or $10 to spare, I would be very grateful. Every single dollar that I could bring in will help more than you understand. What I hope to do is to be able to leave my day job and focus on this full time every day. And with a little help, I can make that happen. So I think that about covers everything. I do appreciate all of you being here. If anybody wants to linger and talk to me further, I'd love to. I'd love to get your names. I want to know who I'm representing, hope to represent. And if anybody wants to talk more about other things related to my policies and platforms that I want to pursue, I'd love to talk to you about that too. Thank you. I appreciate you being here.
Where are you on?